You know when you pull up a digital map on your phone, and you start on the widest possible setting, like you're just looking at the entire globe.
Right, just this massive abstracted blue and green marble floating on the dark mode background of your screen.
Yeah, exactly. It's the ultimate macro view, you know? You see the rough shapes of the continents, the oceans, the ice caps. But from that vantage point, you see absolutely zero specific, actionable detail.
Right, you have to actually zoom in.
Exactly. So you double tap to zoom in, you bypass the continental level, you double tap again, and now you're past the state level, the city level. Suddenly you aren't looking at a landmass anymore, you're looking at a single neighborhood street.
Just one specific roof on one specific house.
Yeah. And if the resolution allowed you to just keep zooming in, you'd eventually be staring at a single isolated puddle in the backyard of that house.
Which is such a dizzying shift in perspective. Moving from that infinite, overwhelming macro scale directly into the microscopic, hyper-specific micro scale, it completely changes how you understand an environment.
Well, today, we are putting a microscope over one specific puddle for you. We're taking a deep dive into the fascinating intersection of um, biological microecosystems and the relentless lengths human beings will go to document them.
Which is such an amazing topic.
It really is. And our source material today isn't some textbook. It's a single, incredibly detailed journal entry from March 2026. It's simply titled Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 219, the second round of Zebra Cichlid spawn.
Yeah, and on the surface, if you just skim the text, this reads like a literal step-by-step account of breeding aquarium fish.
Right.
But the underlying theme we're pulling out for you today is much more profound. It's really a masterclass in the discipline of observation. It highlights the absolute necessity of patience.
And frankly, it showcases the staggering scale of human curiosity.
Absolutely. We're focusing purely on the topics presented in this archive.
Yeah.
You know, the delicate interlocking gears of nature and the sheer breadth of hyper-documentation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I'm wondering, how does a simple backyard pond containing 50 tiny fish connect to a database of thousands of meticulous records on everything from coding in Haskell to growing variegated Mexican mint?
Well, the connective tissue between those seemingly unrelated things is methodology.
Okay, methodology.
Yeah, it's about how an analytical mind processes variables in any given system.
Yeah.
But to understand that, we really need to start with the fish themselves.
Let's do it. Let's lay out the situation documented in the source post. So we have a brooding pair of zebra cichlids, and they're living in an outdoor pond.
Right, and the author puts the word pond in quotes.
Yes, which tells us this isn't like a natural muddy hole in the ground. It's likely a repurposed container or some highly constructed microenvironment. Now, here's the inciting incident that kicks off the log. The survival rate of this pair's first spawn in this exact pond was notoriously low.
Which, in any kind of biological husbandry, a low survival rate is the ultimate red flag.
Yeah, totally.
It's the system flashing a warning light, basically telling you that something in that specific environment is either actively hostile or critically lacking in the resources they need.
So the original plan, which seems completely logical to me, was to move the brooding pair to an indoor aquarium. You know, get them out of the unpredictable elements of the backyard and into a space meant specifically for controlled observation.
But nature operates on its own timeline.
It really does. Because before that move could physically happen, the fish spawned again, just right in the middle of a routine feeding round.
A total surprise variable introduced into the timeline.
Exactly. And it yielded what the source calls a moderate batch of about 50 fry, which that's the term for baby fish or less. Now let's look at this through my bubble versus the wild analogy.
I like this analogy.
Thanks. So an indoor aquarium is a bubble. It's a sterile vacuum. You buy a heater to lock the temperature at exactly 78 degrees. You buy a filter to mechanically strip the water of impurities.
Right, totally controlled.
But the pond, even a constructed one, is the wild. It's subject to the wind, the rain, and whatever decides to climb into it. So my initial thought reading this was, if the first batch had a terrible survival rate in the wild, leaving this second batch in that exact same environment is a massive risk, almost negligent.
And that is the intuitive human response, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we see something fragile failing, our immediate urge is to protect it by controlling the environment completely. We want to put it in the bubble.
Yeah, exactly.
But the analysis in the source material rejects that emotional response in favor of a clinical scientific approach. The documented expectation for this second round is actually a higher survival rate.
Which tripped me up at first. I was like, wait, nothing about the physical pond changed?
But reading closer, you realize something vital did change.
Yes, or rather, a specific biological variable was isolated. The text notes they expect a higher survival rate this time because there are no other fish species in this particular pond.
You hit the nail on the head. It's now a single-species pond.
They isolated the variable of predation.
Exactly. Which turns a noisy environment into a clean experiment. Think about the logic here. The initial failure of the first spawn might have been entirely due to other fish eating the fry.
Right, it might have had absolutely nothing to do with water quality or temperature.
Precisely. If you immediately move the Zebra Cichlids to a completely different indoor aquarium, you're changing 50 variables all at once. The glass dimensions, the water volume, the light spectrum from the LED hood.
And if the fry miraculously survive in that indoor aquarium, you never actually learn why they died in the pond in the first place. You walk away with this false assumption that ponds are inherently bad for breeding.
Yeah, rather than learning that the previous pond simply had hungry tank mates, you lose the data. By leaving them in the single-species pond, the author is forcing the system to reveal its secrets.
That makes total sense.
Think about how you troubleshoot a complex problem at work. When a software deployment fails, your first instinct might be to scrap the whole thing and move to a new platform. The aquarium approach.
Start fresh.
Right. But often, the smartest, most analytical thing you can do is just isolate the variables in your current environment. You lock down the single-species pond, you remove the obvious predators, and you observe what happens next.
You have to strip away the noise to see the actual signal. But isolating biological variables like predators only exposes the environmental variables, because even a single-species pond isn't a vacuum.
Oh, not at all. It's a complex, interlocking machine, and every single gear is turning another gear.
Which brings us to the environmental reality of the source text, which is incredibly nuanced. The journal highlights this fascinating, highly specific detail about the physical location of the setup.
Right, the location is key here.
This particular pond, the one currently holding the 50 new Zebra Cichlid fry, gets the least amount of indirect sunlight of all the ponds being tracked in the yard.
Sunlight being the fundamental, non-negotiable engine of any biological ecosystem.
Exactly, so we get this incredible domino effect outlined in the text. Step 1, the location has low indirect sunlight. Step 2, because of that low sunlight, a floating aquatic plant called Common Salvinia doesn't flourish as well as it does in the other ponds.
It's surviving, but it's struggling.
Yeah. And step 3, less flourishing Salvinia directly means there is less natural food available for the tiny Zebra Cichlid fry.
Which is just a perfect miniature demonstration of a trophic cascade. It lays biological interdependence completely bare.
Because, why does a floating weed matter to a fish that eats meat, right?
Exactly. But let's unpack the mechanics of that. The Salvinia isn't just a plant, it's a microhabitat. The dangling roots of that floating plant house microscopic organisms called infusoria. Those roots also attract tiny aquatic insects.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that microscopic life is exactly what the baby fish rely on to survive their first few critical weeks before their mouths are physically big enough to eat commercial, store-bought fish food.
So the health of a tiny carnivorous baby fish is inextricably tethered to the root system of a floating plant.
Yes, and the health of that floating plant is tethered to the architectural angle of the sun hitting that specific spot in the yard.
If one link in that chain breaks, the whole system rattles.
Oh, absolutely. In a microecosystem, the effects of a broken link are magnified exponentially.
So, knowing all of that, knowing that the natural food supply is handicapped by the shadow of a building or a tree, we have to look at the immediate action taken by the author. Like, what do they do to save the 50 fry?
Absolutely nothing.
Total strategic restraint. The exact quote from the journal is, and I love this, regardless, it's still too early to make any adjustments while tweaking the environment as time goes by.
They acknowledge a potential life-threatening food shortage and consciously decide it is too early to interfere.
I found that line completely profound. I think the hardest part of managing any system, whether you're managing a fish pond, a team of remote employees, or beta software, is fighting the psychological urge to overcorrect immediately.
Why human nature is to fix it right now.
Right. When we see a flaw or a metric dipping, the instinct is to add a massive grow light, dump in extra powdered food, pour in chemical fertilizer to force the Salvinia to grow.
Think about the last time a project of yours started failing.
Yeah.
Your instinct, like anyone's, is to intervene aggressively. But if you intervene aggressively in this pond, you trigger a lethal cascade of unintended consequences.
How so? Like, what happens if you add the food?
Well, if you dump in extra commercial food to make up for the lack of natural microorganisms, the tiny fry can't eat it all. The excess food sinks to the bottom and rots. The rotting food causes an invisible ammonia spike in the water.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and within 48 hours, your entire batch of fry is dead from toxic water, not from starvation.
Wow. So the cure becomes worse than the disease.
The-
You
the-
panic fix the system into a total collapse.
Exactly. Tweaking the environment as time goes by implies a deliberate feedback loop. You observe the baseline, you make one tiny documented change, you wait, and you observe the results of that specific change.
It's a slow, methodical dance with nature, rather than trying to wrestle nature into submission.
Beautifully put.
But, that kind of discipline doesn't just materialize out of nowhere. The patience required to simply watch a potentially failing system without panic fixing it. That comes from a rigorous, almost obsessive dedication to recording data over a long period.
Which brings us to the actual architecture of this source material, the scale of the documentation.
When you zoom out from the fish pond and look at the index of this journal, the scope is truly breathtaking. Because this isn't just one standalone blog post about a hobby. This specific entry is titled, Notes on Fishkeeping, Part 219.
Meaning there are 218 previous documented observations logging the minute variables of aquarium life.
Yes, and the sheer scale of knowledge cataloged in the author's projects index is a wild, beautiful collision of high-tech software engineering and hands-on, dirt-under-your-fingernails botany.
The juxtaposition of topics in that index is fascinating.
It really is. I was looking at notes on gardening, which is currently up to Part 849.
Part 849.
Yes. And it covers highly specific botanical deep dives. One post tracks the effect of microclimates. Another evaluates if variegated Mexican mint should be classified as a weed. There are separate, dedicated entries tracking the growth of little ironweed, mustard, flame violets, and the propagation of Brazilian spinach.
That is a lifetime of horticultural data, meticulously logging variables like soil acidity, moisture retention, and pest resistance.
But then, sitting right next to the logs on flame violets, there are deep dives into highly technical, incredibly dense programming languages. Notes on Haskell programming is up to Part 94.
Right.
There are continuous notes on Elixir, Erlang, Python, Go, and Rust. These are major, complex software languages used to build global digital infrastructure.
We are pivoting from the nitrogen cycle and potting soil directly into compiler logic and server architecture.
And the tracking doesn't stop there. There are notes on dieting at Part 116, notes on photography at Part 233, detailed logs on artificial intelligence, notes on typesetting.
It's incredible.
There are dedicated, separate logs just for betta fish spawns, distinct from the miscellaneous fish spawns. And the timeline of this archive dates all the way back to 2011.
With literally hundreds of posts per year.
In 2024 alone, there were 732 entries. That is 2 deeply researched, logged observations every single day of the year.
To maintain that level of output requires a structural philosophy. It raises the question, why track Haskell programming and variegated Mexican mint side by side?
Right. Is this level of cross-disciplinary tracking, jumping from balancing a goldfish pond to analyzing Wi-Fi 7 MAC addresses, just massive information overload? Or is this the actual blueprint for mastery?
Well, what you're looking at is the exact mindset of free Libre and open source software, often referred to as FLOSS, applied to the physical world.
Okay, I know open source software broadly means code that anyone can see and modify, but how does that apply to a backyard fish pond?
The open source ethos is fundamentally about the mechanism of iterative improvement through transparent version control. Let's break down how a software patch works. In open source development, you don't build a massive operating system in secret and release it perfectly formed. You write a piece of code, you run it, you find a bug, which is just an unexpected variable.
Right.
You document the exact nature of the bug, you write a tiny patch to fix only that bug. You log the patch, you test it again. It's an endless, meticulous cycle of version control.
Version 1.0 becomes 1.1, which eventually becomes 1.1.2.
Exactly. If a patch breaks the system, you roll it back to the previous version because you have a perfect record of every change.
Oh, so Notes on Fishkeeping Part 219 is essentially Fishkeeping version 2.1.9.
Precisely. The author treats a brood of Zebra Cichlids with the exact same analytical rigor as a complex software network. Just like a software engineer wouldn't rewrite an entire operating system because of one memory leak, a systems thinker doesn't drain the pond and move to an aquarium just because the first spawn had a low survival rate.
You run the current build of the pond. You document the lack of sunlight. You wait to see the results. If it fails, you write a tiny patch. maybe trimming a branch, blocking the sun, and you log the result.
Let's take the connection even deeper. You mentioned the journal tracking. If variegated Mexican mint is a weed,
Yeah.
how do you define a weed? It's simply a plant growing in a way or a place that wasn't intended. How do you define a software bug in Python or Go?
Oh, wow. It's code behaving in a way that wasn't intended.
Exactly. The categorization process, observing a system, identifying an unintended behavior, and deciding whether to remove it or adapt to it, is identical.
That makes the cross-disciplinary nature of the archive make total sense. Jumping from Erlang programming to flame violets isn't distraction. It's the application of a universal problem-solving framework.
Erlang, for example, is a programming language specifically designed for highly concurrent, fault-tolerant systems, like telecommunications networks. Now think about a garden.
Okay.
A garden is a highly concurrent, fault-tolerant system. Sunlight, soil moisture, root expansion, and insect populations are all running concurrently. If one element fails, the ecosystem tries to tolerate the fault and rebalance.
That is fascinating.
When you learn how to identify variables and memory leaks in a server, you become inherently better at identifying trophic cascades in a fish tank. The systems echo each other.
The systems echo each other. That completely reframes the idea of tinkering. It's not just messing around in the backyard on a Sunday. It's engaging in a lifelong, highly structured dialogue with the systems around you.
Which really brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you as a listener, the methodology of observation.
Yeah, think about the ponds in your own life. We all have complex systems we're trying to manage. Maybe you're trying to learn a new coding language like Rust, or manage a volatile remote team, or honestly, just trying to keep a finicky houseplant alive on your windowsill.
Right, when something goes wrong in your system, when the survival rate drops or the metrics fail, how do you react?
Are you making massive disruptive changes? Are you ripping the whole plant out of the pot, or firing the entire software platform, or completely changing your diet overnight?
Or are you adopting the methodology of this journal?
Yeah. Are you refraining from immediate action? Are you pausing, observing your single species pond, isolating the variables, and allowing the system to generate clean data before you intervene?
Because we are heavily conditioned by modern culture to want sweeping dramatic fixes. The aquarium solution...
We want the bubble.
We do. But the profound lesson hidden in part 219 of this fish-keeping log is that refraining from action generates better data than immediate intervention. Real mastery, whether you're compiling code in Elixir or propagating Brazilian spinach, is quiet, incremental, and heavily reliant on just watching what happens when the sun hits the water.
It's having the discipline to say it's too early to make any adjustments and trusting the long-term process of observation.
The author of this text has documented thousands of tiny daily observations over 15 years, treating the physical world with the respect and analytical rigor usually reserved for high-level engineering. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If you were to start your own Part 1 today, if you committed to simply observing one small ecosystem in your life without immediately trying to fix it, what hidden variables do you think you'd uncover by the time you reached Part 219?
From the dizzying macro view of the globe, all the way down to understanding the mechanics of a single puddle in the backyard, you just have to be willing to keep zooming in. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep tracking your variables, keep looking for those hidden connections, and we'll catch you next time.